MSB here, and today I'll be going over part 1 of Hex Basics. Now, if you're an advanced player, don't worry, I'll have plenty of complex strategic discussion in future videos. Here I want to provide a baseline of information, so everyone understands Hex moving forward. If you're coming from Hearthstone, I'll be going over the major differences between Hearthstone and Hex to help you jump right in. In part 1 of Hex Basics, I'll be going over card types and stats, beginner deck building, and the phases of each turn in a game. To begin, let's take a look at Hex cards. There are 5 basic card types: resources, troops, constants, basic actions, and quick actions. Most cards have an associated shard type: blood, diamond, ruby, sapphire, or wild, but there are also artifacts which have no shard association. If you want to know more about the shards, check out my older video here. It's a little bit embarrassing, and it's based on the outdated alpha versions of cards, but it'll give you a feel for the theme of each shard. Now, Hex is a resource-based game. Unlike Hearthstone, where you gain 1 mana per turn automatically, in Hex you play resource cards from your hand. Basic resource cards give you 1 permanent resource, which you can immediately spend to pay for cards, and it also replenishes each turn. You also get a charge, which helps to power your hero power, and you also get 1 permanent threshold of the shard type. You can only play 1 resource during each of your turns. Each other card type will cost a certain number of resources. In this case with Ragefire, 2 resource cost and 2 ruby threshold. So for example, if you played 1 ruby shard on your first turn, you'd have 1 resource and 1 ruby threshold, and then let's say you played a diamond shard on your second turn. You would then have 2 resources, 1 ruby threshold, and 1 diamond threshold, meaning that while you could pay the resource cost for Ragefire, which is the 2, you wouldn't have the 2 ruby threshold in order to satisfy the card's requirement. I'll go over a practical example of that moving forward. The second card type is a troop card. In addition to the troop's resource cost and threshold requirement, here is the attack value, which is the amount of damage a troop does when it either blocks or attacks, and here is the defense value, which is the amount of damage the troop can take before it's killed. Unlike Hearthstone, damage is removed from the troops at the end of each player's turn, so you must deal lethal damage within the same turn. Constants are the third card type, and these provide some sort of effect, and generally don't leave play unless they're destroyed, like this zombie plague, which reaches into your opponent's deck and pulls out their troops, turning them into zombies for you to control. Basic actions are the 4th card type, and generally they're a one-shot effect which goes to your graveyard after it resolves, and can do anything from killing or buffing troops to allowing you to draw more cards or even take more turns. Quick actions are the last card type, and these are also one-shot effects. Quick actions can be played on either your turn or during your opponent's turn, and these can do anything from dealing damage, preventing an opponent's card from resolving, or sneakily buffing troops right before they would take lethal damage. I'll be going over the priority and stack systems in next week's video to explain how to use quick actions and abilities during your opponent's turn to disrupt their plays. From these card types, you construct your deck. A constructed deck must have a minimum of 60 cards, with no more than 4 of any one card. On average, a 60-card deck should have 23 or 24 resources, with more or less depending on the cost of your actions and troops. A draft or limited deck must have a minimum of 40 cards, and, on average, should have 16 or 17 resources, also with more or less depending. For a basic deck, you should stick to 1 or 2 shards, just to keep things simple while you learn. For example, this deck, which is a mono diamond deck, and I'll be using this to show off the phases in a turn. Now in a Hex match, both players alternate turns, and in each turn there are 5 phases which dictate what you can do. I'll fast forward through this game in order to show you some of the later turns, where things get more complex. The prep phase occurs first. This is where any start of turn effects take place. Only quick actions and abilities may be played during this phase, and all of your permanent resources replenish. After this phase, you draw a card, unless you're going first and it's the very first turn in the match. You then proceed to your first main phase, where you can play a resource from your hand, along with any basic actions, troops, or constants. You can also play quick actions, but you normally want to keep those so you can be more tricky with them. Here, I'll be playing out a diamond resource, and then playing a Spearcliff Cloud Knight. And it'll get a buff from the Shield Trainer, which bumps up its defense to a 3. As you can tell by this Diamond 3, I have 3 Diamond Threshold, and I also had 3 resources, and that's why I was able to afford the Spearcliff Cloud Knight. After this, it's the attack phase. The active player, the person whose turn it is, elects which troops they're going to attack with. In Hex, unlike Hearthstone, you can only attack an opposing player. You cannot attack enemy troops directly unless a spell or ability states otherwise. So you want to pick which troops attack, and then your opponent gets to decide how these troops are blocked. Be careful about sending weak troops to attack, as they can easily be killed off by a defender, unless of course you're just trying to overwhelm your opponent. Multiple troops can be assigned to block the same troop, so a bunch of weak guys can overwhelm a huge monster. Only quick actions and abilities may be played during the combat phase, and this is normally where the really tricky stuff happens during a match. The blocking system in Hex makes certain keywords like flying, crush, and quick strike very attractive. If you want to know more about these keywords, be sure to follow the link that I have in the description below. Here you can see that my Righteous Paladin dealt lethal damage to my opponent's Arena Brawler. If the AI was a little bit smarter, he could have double blocked with the Baby Yeti, which had a 2 strength, and then dealt lethal damage that way. Please note, the major UI upgrade for Hex has not yet been entered into the beta. After damage is resolved, you then move on to your second main phase. Like the first, you can play any cards during this turn, but you can only play a resource if you didn't play one in your first main phase. As you can tell, I'm unable to play a second Diamond Shard. Lastly, you proceed to your end phase, where any end of turn effects resolve. Hopefully this information will help make your Hex matches or my draft videos make more sense, and of course I'll be building on these lessons moving forward. So be sure to leave a comment if there is a card effect, interaction, or mechanic you want to know more about. As always, I'm MSB, wishing you good games and good times.